Hello, viewer. Good day. Brave New World, a novel by Aldous Huxley. Aldous Huxley had written this marvelous novel, Brave New World. So, Brave New World opens in London nearly 600 years in the future. It is about future after Ford, Henry Ford. Human life has been almost entirely industrialized, controlled by a few people at the top of the world state. The first scene of this novel starts offering you a tour of a lab where human beings are created and conditioned according to the society's strict caste system, establishes the antiseptic tone and the theme of dehumanized life. The natural process of birth, aging, and death represent horror in this world. Bernard Marx, an alpha plus or high caste psychologist, emerges as a single discontented person in a world where material comfort and physical pleasure provided by the drug soma and recreational sex are the only concerns. Scorned by women, Bernard nevertheless managed to engage the attention of Lenina Crown, a pneumatic beauty who agrees to spend a vacation week with him at the remote savage reservation in New Mexico, a place far from the controlled technological world of London. Before Bernard leaves his superior, the DHC spontaneously reveals that long ago he too visited the savage reservation, and he confesses in sorrow that he lost the woman who accompanied him there. Embarrassed by the disclosure of his socially unacceptable emotion, the DHC turns on Bernard, threatening him with banishment for his own social sins, not engaging enthusiastically enough in sex and soma. In the savage reservation with Lenina, Bernard meets a woman from London who gave birth to a son about 20 years before. Seeing his opportunity to gain power over the DHC, the father of the child, Bernard, brings Linda and John back to London and present them publicly to the DHC, who is about to banish Bernard. Shocked and humiliated by the proof of his horrifying connection with natural birth, the DHC flees in terror. Once a social outcast, Bernard now enjoys great success because of his association with new celebrity John called the Savage. Reared on the traditional ways of reservation and an old volume of the poetry of Shakespeare, John finds London strange, confusing, and finally repellent. His quotation of Miranda's line from The Tempest, "Oh, brave new world that has such people in it," at first expresses awe of the other place. His mother told him off as a child, but the quotation became ironic as John becomes more and more disgusted by the recreational sex, soma, and identical human beings of London. Lenina's attempted seduction provokes John's anger and violence, and later the death of Linda further arouses his fury. At last, John's attempt to keep a crowd of deltas from their ration of soma result in riot and his arrest. Along with Bernard and Helmut Watson, an emotional engineer who wishes to be a poet, the three face the judgment of world controller Mustafa Mond, who acknowledged the flaws of this brave new world, but pronounced the loss of freedom and individuality a small price to pay for stability. Mond banishes Bernard and Helmholtz to the Falkland Island and rules that John must stay in London. When his two friends leave for their exile, John determines to make a retreat for himself in the remote, secluded lighthouse outside the city. There he tries to purify himself of a civilization with ritual whipping and vomiting. Drawn by the spectacle of his wild penances, reporter and crowd press in on John, who becomes a public curiosity, a kind of human animal in zoo. When Lenina appears in the crowd, John furiously attacks her with a whip. John's frenzy inflames the crowd, and in accordance with their social training, the violence turns into a sexual orgy, with John drawn in more or less unwillingly. The next day, when John awakes from the effect of the soma, he realizes in horror what he has done. The novel closes on an image of John's body hanging lifeless from a wooden beam in his lighthouse retreat. So this is the story of the Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. Aldous Huxley wrote this Brave New World between the war, this story, after the upheaval of the First World War and before World War II. British society is officially at peace, but the social effects of the Great War, as it was then called, were becoming apparent. Huxley and his contemporaries wrote about changes in national feeling, questioning of long-held social and moral assumption, and the move toward more equality among the classes and between the sexes. The historical background of this novel, the Russian Revolution and challenges to the British Empire abroad, raised the possibility of change on a world scale. At home, the expansion of transportation and communication, the cars, telephone, and radios made affordable through mass production also brought revolutionary changes to daily life. With a new technology, distances grew suddenly shorter and true privacy rarer. While people in the industrialized societies welcomed these advances, they also worried about losing a familiar way of life and perhaps even themselves in the process. The nightmare vision of the fast paced but meaningless routine of Brave New World reflect this widespread concern about the world of 1920s and 1930s. The period also brought a new questioning of traditional morality, especially regarding sex, dress, language, especially fiction expressed a greater openness for both women and men in their sexual life. Some hailed this change as the beginning of true individual freedom, while others condemned it as the end of civilization itself. Huxley, with a typical wit, uses the issue for irony, creating an image of the young Lenina being scolded for her lack of promiscuity. Sexual rules may change, Huxley tells his reader. Although the set in the future than Huxley Brave New World, truly a novel of its time. At a period of great change, Huxley creates a world in which all the present worrying trends have produced terrible consequences. Movement towards socialism in 1920s, for example, becomes in Huxley's future the totalitarian world state, questioning of religious belief, and the growth of materialism likewise transform into a religion of consumerism with Henry Ford as its gods, and if Model T's role of the assembly line in the present. Utopian fiction we find in this novel. In constructing an imaginary world, Huxley contributes to a long tradition, the utopian fiction. Utopia is a Greek word for no place and a good place first came into English in Sir Thomas More's work Utopia in 1516, a fictional account of faraway nation whose characteristic invite comparison with More's England. More used his fictional utopia to point out the problem present in his own society. Since then, writers have created utopia to challenge reader to think about the underlying assumption of their own culture. Gulliver's Travel, written in 1726 by Jonathan Swift, seems at first to be a book of outlandish travel stories, yet throughout the narrative, Swift employs his fictional world ironically to make serious argument about the injustice of his own Britain. In utopian fiction, imagination becomes a way to explore alternative in politics, social and religious life. In Huxley's time, the most popular writer of utopian fiction was H.G. Wells, the author of Time Machine, The War of the World, Modern Utopia, and many other novels. Wells held an optimistic view of the future with an internationalist perspective. So these is what begins parody turned into a novel of its own, Brave New World. The Brave New World of Huxley novel is not a good place, and so it is not, in the strictest terms, a utopia. Huxley himself called his world a negative utopia, the opposite of traditional utopia. Readers also have used the word dystopia, meaning bad place, to describe Huxley's fictional world and other like it. Thank you very much. I hope you will enjoy this novel when you read it, The Brave New World by Aldous Huxley.